If you want me to have a new mother, then it has to be her." The words trembled out of Sophia Alden's mouth that night, echoing across the chandeliered ballroom, as if they had cracked the marble walls themselves. Her hand gripped Marianne's tightly, knuckles white, tears streaking down her pale cheeks. Cameras flashed, gasps rippled, and the 5 women vying for her father's love sat frozen, diamonds catching the light, eyes wide with disbelief. But this story did not begin there. It began days earlier, in a mansion that towered above Miami's skyline, where grief lingered in the shadows despite the shine of crystal chandeliers. Richard Alden, a billionaire whose face appeared in magazines more often than in his daughter's world, had decided that the silence in his home could no longer be tolerated. 3 years had passed since his wife's sudden death, and in his restless logic, he thought he had found a solution, not for himself, but for his 16-year-old daughter. Richard would remarry, and not quietly. That evening, as the sunset poured fire across the horizon, the Alden mansion's grand doors swung open to reveal 5 contenders. Each woman arrived as though stepping onto a stage. Vivian, the Parisian art dealer with silk trailing from her shoulders. Clarissa, an oil heiress whose laughter clanged louder than her diamond bracelets. Celine, the influencer, rehearsed angles stitched into her every movement. Patricia, graceful yet sharp, her smile carrying an invisible edge. And Juliana, fiery and young, arrogance coiled in her step like perfume you couldn't escape. They swept into the marble foyer, showering Richard with attention that glittered but cut. "Richard, you look as commanding as ever." "Sophia, darling, how you've grown." Their words floated like feathers dipped in glass, pretty but sharp if held too long. At the far side of the room, slipping in, almost unnoticed, was Marianne Brooks. She wasn't invited to dazzle, she carried no perfume, no jewels. She came with a tray of water glasses balanced in her steady hands. Marianne was 37, her skin a deep, rich brown, her natural coils tied back with a scarf worn thin from years of work. Her hazel eyes carried both fatigue and something softer, an unspoken kindness that made the air feel safer. She placed a glass by Sophia's side and offered a small smile. A smile that asked nothing. A smile that reached deeper than any of the rehearsed charm parading through the room. Sophia clung to that smile. Dinner was served at a polished mahogany table stretching longer than most city apartments. The socialites glowed under chandelier light, laughing too loud, praising Richard's empire, dropping lines about how they simply adored children. Yet when their gazes flicked to Sophia, it was only for a moment, an obligatory glance before turning back to the man whose billions they coveted. Sophia sat silent, twisting her napkin beneath the table, her grief tightening in her chest like a locked door. She looked again toward the corner of the room where Marianne stood quietly with the staff, her hands folded neatly, her presence steady as stone. Her father cleared his throat, raising his glass. His voice was firm, practiced, the kind that could announce deals worth millions without trembling. "Tonight marks a new beginning. Sophia will decide which of these remarkable women will join our family." The women straightened, anticipation glittering in their eyes. Sophia's stomach dropped. A decision? A game of choosing? She felt like a pawn on a board she had never agreed to play. But her gaze drifted once more, past the diamonds and silk, to the woman in the corner who had already, without permission or recognition, filled the hollow spaces others ignored. Outside Miami, Ez's skyline pulsed with neon and possibility. Inside the Alden mansion, beneath crystal and marble, something invisible shifted. A storm was building, not of weather but of truth, and when it finally broke, no one in that room would remain untouched. The storm inside Sophia's chest had only just begun to stir. Dinner carried on with the false glitter of wealth. Vivian recited a story about an art auction in Monaco, gesturing elegantly with jeweled fingers as though she were painting the air itself. Clarissa interrupted with booming laughter, clinking her diamond bracelets against her wineglass until the sound turned heads. Celine kept angling her face toward invisible cameras, her voice syrupy, dripping in compliments for Richard's legendary success. Sophia felt smaller with every passing minute. Not one of them had asked what her favorite book was. Not one of them had looked into her eyes long enough to see the grief hidden there. Marianne returned quietly, refilling glasses with steady hands. She avoided the conversation, lowering her gaze respectfully. Yet Sophia watched the way her fingers trembled slightly when she leaned near Clarissa, who wrinkled her nose at the maid's presence, as though the very scent of work offended her. When Marianne passed by Juliana, the young socialite leaned back in her chair and said loudly enough for the table to hear, "Careful with the tray, sweetheart. Wouldn't want to ruin my dress. It costs more than your yearly salary." The table erupted in laughter, except for Sophia. Her fork froze mid-air. Richard chuckled uneasily, adjusting his cufflinks. He did not defend Marianne, nor did he scold Juliana. To him, this was banter, meaningless in the grand scheme. But Sophia saw it differently. To her, Juliana's words were a knife. Marianne's lips pressed together tightly, and she gave the smallest nod of apology, as though she were the one at fault for being mocked. The humiliation grew sharper as the evening progressed. Celine staged a photo by asking Rianne to pour her wine again, though the glass was already full. "A little slower this time," Celine murmured, tilting her head so her profile would catch the chandelier light. The camera on her phone clicked. The photo showed not Celine's cruelty, but her elegance against the blurred backdrop of a maid's bowed head. Sophia's chest burned. By dessert, Richard raised his glass once more. "Tomorrow night," he announced, "we will hold a small gala. Friends, colleagues, family acquaintances will join us. It will be the evening Sophia decides. Until then, enjoy yourselves. This house is yours." The women clapped lightly, smiles stretched wide. Sophia excused herself, claiming a headache. No one stopped her, except Marianne. In the dim hallway, Sophia leaned against the wall, fighting the weight pressing down on her ribs. Footsteps approached softly. Marianne's voice came low and careful. "Miss Sophia," she said, her hazel eyes concerned. "Are you all right?" Sophia blinked quickly, swallowing the lump in her throat. "They don't even see me," she whispered. "I'm just a prize they have to win." Marianne hesitated, glancing toward the dining room. Then, with a gentleness that defied the uniform she wore, she crouched slightly to meet Sophia's gaze. "Your worth isn't theirs to decide. You don't have to let them tell you who you are." It was the first real conversation Sophia had had all evening. The words sank into her like water into dry soil. From the doorway, Richard's shadow stretched down the hall. He had come looking for his daughter, but when he saw Marianne crouched before her, speaking softly, his face hardened. His tone was brisk. "Marianne, your place is with the staff." The warmth between them snapped under the weight of his authority. Marianne straightened immediately, lowering her gaze. "Yes, sir." She retreated, her footsteps swallowed by the hall. Sophie. Haya's jaw clenched. Her father's blindness felt unbearable. He didn't see the cruelty of the women. He didn't see the humiliation Marianne endured. And worst of all, he didn't see the truth, what Sophia had already begun to realize. The woman who treated her like family was not seated at the dining table, shining with jewels. She was the one walking back into the shadows, carrying trays no one noticed. The gala loomed ahead like a storm cloud, and Sophia knew the moment of choice would come, whether her father was ready for the truth or not. The next evening descended upon the Alden estate like a stage curtain rising. Floodlights lit the marble steps, valets rushed to and fro, and the driveway filled with luxury cars gleaming like predators in the night. Inside, the ballroom had been transformed into a spectacle of wealth. Crystal chandeliers blazed, white roses filled every vase, and the air buzzed with the clinking of champagne glasses. Richard Alden thrived in it. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, clasping hands, exchanging smiles, speaking in the polished tone of a man who knew how to own a room. Beside him, the 5 women shimmered like rival queens at court, their gowns sequined, their laughter rehearsed. They orbited him as though each believed she was already the chosen one. But beneath the glitter, something darker brewed. Sophia lingered near the edge of the room, watching it unfold. She wore a soft blue gown her father had chosen, but it felt like armor more than beauty. Her heart raced, not from excitement, but from dread. Every word she overheard chipped away at her patience. "Such a clever idea," Patricia cooed to a cluster of guests. "Letting Sophia decide, she'll learn responsibility while choosing wisely." "Of course," Vivian added, her French accent dripping with superiority, "and naturally she will see what is best for the family." Their eyes never lingered on Sophia for long. She wasn't the point, she was the tool. Marianne worked in the shadows, carrying trays of Horace, d'oeuvres, clearing glasses with swift precision. Though she moved quietly, she carried herself with dignity, her chin lifted just enough to remind herself she would not be broken. Yet that dignity only made her more of a target. As Marianne passed Juliana's group, Juliana accidentally bumped her elbow, spilling a glass of red wine across Marianne's apron. Gasps rippled. "Oh dear," Juliana exclaimed, feigning surprise. "I suppose that's what happens when servants aren't careful." Her friends laughed, covering their mouths delicately, as though cruelty could be hidden behind manicured fingers. Marianne froze, her hazel eyes wide for a moment. Then, wordlessly, she bowed her head and turned toward the staff entrance, crimson staining her uniform. Sophia's fists clenched, her face flushed with heat, but she stayed silent, watching her father's reaction. Richard's expression tightened briefly, but instead of outrage, he smoothed his features, smiled at the guests, and carried on as if nothing had happened. To him, it was a trifle. To Sophia, it was unforgivable. Later, as music swelled and dancing began, Sophia found Marianne in the service hallway, scrubbing at the stain with trembling hands. "You don't have to let them treat you like that," Sophia said fiercely, stepping closer. Marianne glanced up, startled. In the dim light, she looked both weary and unbreakable. "It's not the first time, Miss Sophia, and it won't be the last." Tears pricked Sophia's eyes. "But it's wrong. You're the only person in this house who actually cares, and they act like you're nothing." Marianne's hands stilled. Slowly, she reached up and brushed Sophia's cheek with her thumb, a gesture so tender it cracked something open in the girl's chest. Sometimes caring means staying quiet, so others don't have to hurt more than they already do. The words carried the weight of a woman woo. Ho had endured far more than spilled wine. Sophia's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to promise Marianne she would change everything, but footsteps echoed behind them. Richard appeared, his expression taut. "Sophia," he said firmly, "our guests are waiting. Don't linger in the halls." And Marianne, his gaze hardened. "See to your duties." Sophia looked at her father, her voice trembling with restrained anger. "She's not just duties, Dad. She's a person." Richard blinked, startled by her defiance. For a moment his mask slipped. Then he straightened his shoulders. "Go back inside, Sophia." Sophia obeyed, but not in spirit. Each step she took back toward the ballroom felt like walking deeper into a lie. The laughter, the music, the glinting jewels, it all felt poisonous now. And as she watched the 5 women twirl and charm, their smiles sharp as blades, a decision began to form inside her. She would not play their game. She would not allow them to rewrite her life. Tomorrow, when the world was watching, she would speak. And when she did, it would shatter everything. The gala's second night arrived, cloaked in expectation. Word had spread among Richard Alden's circles. His daughter would name her future stepmother before a crowd of Miami's most powerful families. Reporters lingered outside the estate gates, cameras ready to catch the moment. Inside, the ballroom gleamed brighter than ever. Golden drapes cascaded from the ceiling, chandeliers flickered like captured stars, and the polished floor reflected gowns and tuxedos like glass. The 5 women were radiant, their gowns sharpened to weapons of beauty. Each of them smiled as if victory already rested in her hand. Sophia stood at the edge of the stage her father had ordered erected for the occasion. Her pale blue dress brushed against her ankles, her palms damp. She scanned the crowd of strangers, faces blurred by wealth, eyes glittering with curiosity. Then her gaze drifted to the back of the room where Marianne stood with the other staff, dressed once more in her crisp uniform, hands folded before her. The music quieted. Richard stepped forward, commanding silence with the weight of his presence. His voice carried, smooth and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is special. Tonight my daughter Sophia will honor us with a choice. She will decide which of these remarkable women will join our family, bringing grace and guidance into her life." Applause filled the air. The 5 women straightened, jewels catching the light. Sophia's chest tightened. Her pulse roared in her ears. She saw Vivian's calculating smile, Clarissa's greedy sparkle, Celine's camera-ready pose, Patricia's cool elegance, Juliana's predatory gleam. Each of them radiated expectation. None of them radiated love. Her father turned to her, his hand extended. "Sophia," he said, his blue eyes searching, The decision is yours." The ballroom fell silent. Sophia stepped forward, her small hand trembling in her father's larger one. She raised her chin, forcing herself to breathe. "You want me to choose a new mother." Her voice shook, then steadied. "But none of these women see me. They see you, and your money. They don't care about me. Not really." Gasps stirred the crowd. One of the women, Juliana, let out a sharp laugh. What a childish thing to say. But Sophia ignored her. She turned, eyes searching until they landed on the one face that mattered, Marianne's. Sophia's steps carried her across the ballroom, away from the stage, away from the glitter. She stopped before the maid who stood frozen, her hazel eyes wide with shock. Slowly, deliberately, Sophia reached out and clasped her hand. "If you want me to have a new mother," Sophia said, her voice breaking into tears that glistened under the lights, "then it has to be her." The room exploded. Murmurs rose like thunder. Gasps rattled through the crowd. Some guests covered their mouths, others shook their heads. Cameras flashed wildly. The 5 women stood stunned. Clarissa muttered, "She's lost her mind." Vivian's lips tightened into a cruel smile. Juliana's face twisted with rage. "You're choosing a maid? Over us?" Sophia squeezed Marianne's hand tighter. "She's the only one who has treated me like family, the only one who actually sees me." Marianne shook her head faintly, whispering, "Sophia, no. You can't." Her voice cracked with fear, but her hand didn't pull away. Richard stood frozen on the stage, his face drained of color. He had expected glamour, approval, the applause of his peers. Instead, his daughter had shattered the script. Juliana's voice cut through the uproar. "You're throwing away your inheritance on a servant! Do you have any idea how ridiculous this is?" Sophia turned sharply, her tear-streaked face glowing with fury. "At least she loves me, which is more than any of you ever will." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause could have been. Richard's mask of composure began to crack. The weight of cameras, of whispers, of his daughter's trembling hand in Marianne's, all pressed against him. For the first time in years, Richard Alden didn't feel like the master of his world. He felt small, blind, and ashamed, and the night was far from over. The ballroom was chaos. Voices clashed over one another, shocked whispers, indignant cries, the clicking frenzy of reporters' cameras. The 5 women who had dressed themselves in diamonds and silk now stood like statues, chipped and crumbling, their poise cracking into raw anger. Juliana stormed forward first, her red gown flaring like flame. "This is an outrage," she spat. "Richard, are you going to allow your daughter to embarrass you like this? To shame you in front of your peers with her?" She thrust a finger toward Marianne, who stood stiff, trembling, her face pale against her deep brown skin. "Clarissa Addy," her voice, shaking her bracelets as though they gave weight to her fury. "I flew across the country for this circus? For a child to throw a tantrum and elevate a maid above women of breeding and class?" The crowd stirred, half hungry for scandal, half shocked into silence. Some chuckled uncomfortably, others whispered behind raised hands. But no one stepped forward to defend Marianne, no one except Sophia. "She's more of a mother than any of you could ever be," Sophia shouted, her voice breaking but firm. Tears clung to her lashes, but her spine stood straight, as if she had grown years older in the space of a minute. "She listens to me. She cares when I cry. She sees me. That's all I ever wanted. Not money, not diamonds, just someone who sees me." The words sliced through the air like glass. Patricia attempted to smooth things over, her tone dripping with condescension. "Sophia, darling, you're young. You don't understand the responsibilities of family. A maid can't—" "Don't you dare call her a maid like it's an insult," Sophia snapped, her voice trembling with rage. "Her name is Marianne, and she's more of a person than anyone in this room pretending to care about me." The murmurs swelled. Reporters scribbled furiously. The musicians, unsure, had lowered their bows. Silence hovered, broken only by the scuffle of feet and camera shutters. Richard stood frozen, his hand tightening around his champagne glass until his knuckles blanched. His perfect evening, his calculated plan, it had collapsed into dust. He saw his colleagues watching, waiting for him to restore order, to prove he still held control. And yet, staring at his daughter, raw and broken in her honesty, something inside him faltered. Marianne tried to pull her hand free, whispering urgently, "Sophia, please, don't do this. They'll ruin me. They'll ruin you." But Sophia clung tighter, her voice rising. "I don't care. You're the only one who's been real with me since Mom died. You're the only one who hasn't treated me like a job or a deal. I want you." The crowd gasped again. One of Richard's oldest associates shook his head in disbelief, muttering to his wife, "The Aldens are finished." Richard finally found his voice, though it wavered. "Sophia." He stepped forward, his gaze shifting between her tear-streaked face and Marianne's trembling one. This isn't how things are done. We can't." "No, Dad!" Sophia cut him off, her voice shrill with years of bottled pain. "This is exactly how things should be done. For once, it's not about your money or your reputation. It's about me, about what I need. And I need her." The words rang through the hall, silencing even the socialites' sneers. For the first time in years, Richard saw his daughter, not as a problem to be solved, not as an extension of his legacy, but as a child still bleeding from the loss of her mother, a child begging for love. His throat tightened. He turned his gaze to Marianne, who stood trembling, her apron stained, her eyes glistening with both fear and a longing she had buried for years. The crowd waited, the entire room balanced on the edge of his response. And Richard Alden, master of empires, suddenly found himself powerless. The ballroom had fallen into a heavy, suspended silence. All eyes pinned themselves to Richard Alden, the billionaire whose name commanded boardrooms, whose voice could buy or sell entire blocks of the Miami skyline. Yet here, in his own home, he stood paralyzed by a 16-year-old's trembling voice and the unwavering grip of her hand in Marianne's. Richard's breath caught in his throat. He saw it all at once. Sophia's thin shoulders drawn tight with fear, her eyes shimmering with desperation, her lips trembling from years of being unseen. And beside her, Marianne, sturdy, steady, but shrinking under the weight of humiliation. He remembered the laughter when wine was spilled on her, the mocking comments disguised as jokes, the way she had endured it all without complaint. He had allowed it. He had been complicit. Juliana broke the silence with venom. "Richard, are you really going to stand here and let your daughter throw away your family's dignity for the help?" A murmur of agreement rippled through her circle. Clarissa's diamonds flashed as she gestured broadly. "This is madness. If you let this go on, you'll be a laughingstock. We all will." The words struck Richard's pride like hammers, but they felt hollow now. He looked at his daughter, her small frame braced like a soldier before war. Her voice rang in his ears. "She sees me. That's all I ever wanted." Something broke inside him. A dam he hadn't realized he had built, one made of pride, control, denial, crumbled. Richard stepped forward. His hand, usually steady as iron, shook as he set down his glass. His voice was hoarse when it finally came. "Enough." The room froze. He looked directly at Marianne, and for the first time in years, his polished mask cracked. His eyes shone with shame. "I owe you an apology, for standing silent while you were humiliated, for treating you like you were less. You are not." His throat worked, fighting for control. "I failed you. I failed my daughter. I let my grief turn into blindness." Gasps rose from the crowd. The socialites stiffened in disbelief. Richard Alden, titan of steel and glass, was apologizing publicly to a maid. He turned to Sophia, his voice breaking. "And I failed you most of all. I thought I could buy your healing. I thought I could fix your pain by replacing what we lost with something that looked acceptable. But I never asked what you needed. I never listened." His lips trembled as his eyes filled. "I'm so sorry, Sophia." Sophia's tears streamed freely now, but her shoulders sagged in relief. For the first time in years, her father was speaking not as a tycoon, not as a man of power, but as a father. Richard sank to one knee before his daughter, his head bowed. A billionaire, humbled in front of his empire. "If she is who you choose," he said softly, "then I will honor it. Not because it suits me, but because it's what you need." The crowd erupted. Some in outrage, others in stunned silence. Patricia hissed under her breath. Celine turned away, hiding her fury behind a fixed smile. Juliana's face twisted in disbelief, her plans crumbling in the span of seconds. But none of it mattered. In the center of the storm, Sophia clung to Marianne's hand. Marianne, whose hazel eyes were brimming with tears she tried to hide, whispered, "Richard, you don't have to." "Yes," he said firmly, looking at her with a rawness that startled even himself. "I do. I see you now. And I see what you've been to my daughter all along." For the first time, Marianne allowed herself to meet his gaze fully. The room blurred around them, fading into insignificance. In that moment, a truth settled into the air heavier than gold. Dignity could not be bought, love could not be paraded, and the smallest kindness could hold more power than all the diamonds in the world. The night ended not with applause, not with champagne toasts, but with silence, thick, uncertain, and unforgettable. The guests slipped out one by one, their jeweled heels clicking against marble, their whispered judgments trailing like smoke. By dawn, the Alden estate stood quieter than it had in years, the chandeliers dimmed, the echoes of that moment still vibrating in its walls. Richard Alden sat alone in his study, head bowed in his hands. The city outside was waking, but inside, his world felt suspended between shame and something resembling freedom. His phone buzzed with messages, headlines, board members demanding explanations, social acquaintances stunned at his spectacle. He ignored them all. For the first time, he didn't care about the markets or the gossip pages. He cared only about what his daughter would think when she woke up. Upstairs, Sophia lay curled against Marianne, her small hand still wrapped around the older woman's. Marianne had tried to leave after carrying Sophia to bed, but the girl had whispered, "Stay, please." And so she stayed, sitting stiffly in the armchair until sleep pulled her under too. When morning light filtered through lace curtains, Marianne woke to Sophia's soft breathing. She stood, smoothing her uniform, ready to slip away before the weight of what had happened pressed too hard. But as she turned, she found Richard standing in the doorway. He looked different in the morning light. No tuxedo, no glass of brandy, no mask. Just a man, exhausted and humbled. His voice was low. "She sleeps better when you're near. I've never been able to do that for her." Marianne hesitated, torn between retreat and acknowledgement. She folded her hands in front of her apron. "I only did what anyone with a heart would do." "No," Richard said softly. "Not anyone. I had all the resources in the world and still failed her. You, without anything to gain, gave her back her laughter." He paused, and for the first time his eyes truly searched hers, not as employer to servant, but as man to woman. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it." Marianne's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, yet years of being unseen weighed against hope. She shook her head gently. "Don't promise for my sake. Promise for hers." Richard nodded, a vow forming silently. Weeks turned into months. The estate no longer echoed with Juliana's cutting remarks or Celine's shrill laughter. The polished halls were quieter, warmer somehow. Richard began attending Sophia's school plays, waiting awkwardly in cafeteria lines just to hear her chatter. He ked with her in the garden, sometimes saying nothing, sometimes asking about the books she read. Slowly, carefully, Sophia began to trust that he wouldn't vanish again behind a wall of meetings and contracts. And Marianne remained, not because of duty, but because Sophia begged her to. Her role shifted, no longer just a maid, but Sophia's anchor, her confidant. Richard too treated her differently. At first with awkward politeness, then with quiet admiration. He stopped giving orders and started asking questions. The staff noticed, the neighborhood whispered, but he didn't care. One spring evening, Sophia bounded into the study where her father was reading reports. "Daddy," she said with a mischievous grin, "are you going to marry Marianne?" Richard froze, his pen stilled mid-signature. His eyes flicked to Marianne, who had been setting down tea. Her face flushed as she whispered, "Sophia." But the girl only giggled, twirling in her sundress. "You said I could choose, remember? And I already did." Richard's chest tightened. He looked at Marianne, her eyes wide, her lips parted in disbelief. His voice, quiet but steady, carried more truth than any contract he'd ever signed. If she'll have me, Sophia. Then yes. One day. The room grew still. Marianne's heart raced, her mind protesting all the reasons it was impossible, the gossip, the imbalance, the years of being overlooked. But then she saw Sophia, her eyes glowing with a light she hadn't seen since before her mother's passing. And in that light, hope softened the edges of doubt. Tears blurred Marianne's vision as she whispered, "One day." Sophia squealed and clapped her hands, collapsing in laughter between them both. Richard reached across the space, not as a billionaire, not as a master, but as a man extending his hand. Marianne took it, her fingers trembling against his warmth. In that moment, the three of them, grief-stricken father, overlooked maid, and lonely daughter, became something new, not polished, not perfect, but real. And in the quiet glow of that evening, it was enough.